mixing it up today here on the security stage. And some of you may have heard of a company called Facebook, possibly Instagram. It's a sort of obscure little social network. But for obvious reasons, the idea that we were going to improve our lives through sharing photographs of our cats and newborn babies has turned out a little bit different to how it was perhaps originally intended. But to navigate that is a big issue. So here to tell us where is next for the mother of all social media companies is Michelle Proti, who's a Chief Privacy Officer and Head of Product at Meta. And to chat to him is Frederic Ladenois, our very own Flying Dutchman with TechCrunch. Give them a round of applause, everyone. Thank you.
Facebook, Meta. I'll call it Facebook.
You've heard
guarantee
of it.
You. Yes, privacy. Now, I admit, when I think of Facebook and privacy, it's not in a positive way most of the time, right? You've been through this process. Now, since the consent agreement a few years ago, you've got 2 chief privacy officers, and you're one of those. Why 2, and how did that happen? Like, why do you need 2 chief privacy officers?
Yeah, it's a common question we get, and we have 2 chief privacy officers. I guess it's part and parcel with some of our scale and some of the complexity of what we have to deal with. We have a chief privacy officer for policy. Her name is Erin Egan, and I'm the chief privacy officer for product. And Erin's role as chief privacy officer for policy is more simplistically externally facing. My role is more internally facing. So Erin's out there meeting with policymakers, legislators, regulators around the world, explaining, getting feedback on a lot of our data practices, and keeping her finger on the pulse of privacy external developments. My role, you mentioned the FTC consent order. My role was created in 2019 as part of our settlement with the FTC, Chief Privacy Officer for Product. And I'm essentially responsible for ensuring the company is complying with all our global data practice obligations, including the FTC order itself.
Right. So your job is to put all of that into practice, into the apps, make sure everything is compliant.
That's right. Yeah, and the majority of the teams that I oversee are product and engineering teams who, as you said, put these things into practice, along with global compliance and operations professionals. So they're doing things ranging from fairly deep infrastructure engineering that's altering the way data flows through our pipes, automating purpose limitation of data, things like that, to consumer-facing products, like a lot of our privacy settings, controls, tools that allow you to download and access your information, to then a whole array of processes at the company that are at the intersection of compliance and product, like a privacy review process where we review an average of 1,200 new products and features per month that the company launches across every product group to ensure that we understand the privacy risks and they're mitigated.
What does, just to jump in there, what does such a process look like to actually review all of that? Because it sounds daunting.
It's definitely a broad process. It's a requirement in our FTC order that new products and features get a review. And that review is essentially a broad look at, given the nature of this product, what privacy risks does it introduce and what mitigations do they have to have? And the way we execute that is it's deeply embedded in every product team at the company. We have central teams that embed with product groups to help sort of facilitate and manage this. But it's essentially now part and parcel with the product development process at Meta. You can't ship the product without this review being finalized. So it's helped really embed privacy by design principles and right into the core of our product development processes.
Now let me take it one step back. When you became the Chief Privacy Officer, 2019 it was, right? Before that, you were in product marketing. That seems like there's almost a conflict between product marketing and privacy. And how did you end up kind of taking this role? Why were you the right person to take this role?
What I did in my previous role was I ran a bunch of product marketing teams that essentially set up a bunch of new business and product processes at the company. The teams I ran were at the intersection of publisher and advertiser needs and our products. So the qualifications I had is I had some knowledge of how to set up a whole bunch of new systems and processes at the company that sort of transcend policy, that cut across policy and product. So that was the relevant qualification.
Okay, kind of navigating all this system. When you took the role, what did you find? How bad were things?
Well, we obviously before 2019, we had existing privacy oversight processes, we had existing central teams. But when we settled with the FTC, and it was July 2019, it really was a moment that Mark and the company took as kind of a catalyst and a real sea change in how seriously we took privacy. And as a result, we've pretty fundamentally overhauled how we do it and invested quite massively. And it's been a huge journey to get there because at that point we just settled with the FTC and we were under some pretty significant time pressure to stand up a quite fundamentally new global privacy program under tight timelines. So it was a real sprint. But to give you an idea of the magnitude of the change for the company, when I took the role, there was a few hundred people centrally in product and engineering teams working on privacy. There's now thousands, right? And when we settled with the FTC, obviously there was a lot of press about the $5 billion fine we paid.
It's a lot of money.
It is. But the much more impactful part of that settlement was the extent to which it's changed the company's processes. And to give you an idea, we'll end this year having invested an additional $5 billion in new teams and people and operating expenses that are all geared to our privacy oversight and our privacy practices.
And as part of that, you're talking about this as change in culture as well, right? Are you training all of your engineers, all of your designers to work privacy first? Is that something you're doing, and how are you doing that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge cultural change element to everything we've done. I think every Meta employee would tell you that privacy considerations are much more deeply embedded in product development, than they were 4 years ago. And there's multiple training aspects to how we do it. We have an annual required training, which is actually going on at the company right now, that every employee and contractor takes. We have dozens of different role-specific trainings, many geared to particular technical disciplines that are specific to individual aspects of privacy. And then you have this process embedding privacy risk and risk mitigation in privacy review in the product development itself, all overseen by a broad global privacy program of controls and safeguards.
Let me ask you about that company-wide privacy training, because I know most of us probably have to take these trainings sometimes, and you just kind of click through a slideshow. And you don't really remember what you clicked on? What is yours different from that?
It is a little different. I mean, it's got the same core content, the core requirements of privacy, the core processes you need to go through. We've got a little higher production value on our required training. And there's actually actors and an ongoing storyline that runs through it. And it's got an internal fan club. Calls it, treats it like a Netflix show and talks about season 2 of the privacy training. So, still a required compliance training, but yeah, we've invested a little bit more in trying to make it engaging and compelling.
Maybe you can get a deal with Netflix for that.
I don't know.
So, now, at the end of every quarter now, because of the consent agreement, right, you have to produce a report that goes to the judge, I guess, or the government, and you have to sign that, you and Mark Zuckerberg. That report is not, what's in that report?
So what Mark and I sign quarterly is certifications, which aren't really much of a report. It's a little bit more standard. Just certifications of our compliance with the requirements of the privacy program.
But you also have to describe when things went wrong, right?
Well, we update the FTC on a regular basis on a whole array of things going on at the company on privacy. If we have incidents or what we call SEVs or breakages, we'll inform them of that. We keep them informed of our ongoing product roadmap and what's coming and how we've thought about the privacy risks and mitigations. So that's all part of our ongoing sort of rhythm of the business with the FTC.
Do you make any of that public?
Well, all our new product plans ultimately become public.
Sure.
I think the core artifact that the FTC gets around our privacy program is an ongoing external assessment of our privacy practices. Mm-hmm. So we're under constant rolling every 2-year external assessment of how privacy is working. And that's through an independent auditor, not affiliated with the company. And that's quite a deep assessment. They produce a report, and that report goes to the FTC.
Sure.
Yep.
Since you sign it, you're on the hook for this, right? To some degree.
Yeah. I'm responsible to make sure we're implementing what we need to, and that keeping our privacy practices, compliant with global standards and requirements.
Sure. Yep. Have you ever gotten to a point where you were worried you couldn't be in compliance?
No, I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
I would say it's paramount for everybody at the company to ensure we're doing what we need to comply. The thing that's challenging is privacy is such an evolving space, and it's never black and white on exactly what compliance will entail. And there's ultimately all kinds of different technical approaches to problems. There's different process and transparency approaches to problems. So we're constantly wrestling with what's the appropriate approach given this particular privacy risk.
Sure.
And that's where the complexity comes in.
Sure. And complexity also because you operate globally. And just over the last few years, there have been regulations popping up everywhere around privacy for good reason, right? But how can you comply with all of those? Like, what do you do to ensure that you're in compliance with every single regulation around the world?
Yeah, it's certainly true that the last few years have seen by, regulation standards an explosion of new requirements. It's new laws passed in countries, new interpretations of existing laws, increasing regulator enforcement actions which have implications and changes of practices. But yeah, it's something we invest significant resources in understanding and managing and implementing. We call it our regulatory readiness process at the company, and we track literally hundreds of new and emerging global laws and requirements, which translate into strategies and product plans by domain of privacy work, whether that's deletion controls, retention controls, sensitive data use. And we deploy those across the company and implement them, as required. So it's a very involved process with really significant investment across the company, and it's extremely complex.
Yeah.
I have no idea how smaller companies would comply.
Right. Seems daunting. Well, one way to do it is maybe just take the strictest possible interpretation of the strictest law and regulation that you have and just apply that globally.
Yeah.
Right?
There's always very significant trade-offs that come with doing something like that, because the strictest interpretation of a given requirement typically brings with it, major product and feature trade-offs, but more importantly, often these things will trade off other responsibility equities. Like use of data for integrity and security remains very important, and so it is never obvious that defaulting to the most restrictive global standard is the optimal approach.
Okay. How do you approach this right now, though? Do you have a back-end system that just, if I'm a Facebook user, I go into the privacy setting, it's different in every country? Like, how do you manage that? How do the product groups manage that?
We manage a lot of it centrally. We have what we call jurisdiction platforms, which which track the various states of various different controls, jurisdiction by jurisdiction as required. And often we do deploy major things globally. We're required to reduce the complexity.
Sure. Let's talk about the user for a moment too. Especially I think after Cambridge Analytica came out, expectations have changed as well. Is that something you're seeing in your day-to-day work, that just user expectations have changed, not just the regulators' expectations?
User expectations of privacy, as anyone who works in the space knows, are kind of a complex cocktail of extent to which users expect and understand privacy. I think at the core, though, privacy is a fundamental equity that matters deeply to users. And when we assess our privacy practices in any product or feature, we sort of use some core frameworks to get our arms around what's expected in terms of privacy. Like, we have a framework we use in our privacy review process that's the 8 expectations of privacy, which is in many ways a synthesis of the core requirements of GDPR, ranging from our own responsibility to minimize our data use and to purpose limit it, to the user-facing transparency we offer, the controls we offer, the access to data we offer, to our own accountability requirements and how we oversee and govern our privacy practices.
Sure. I'm asking that because I'm wondering, like, how much of what you do is to protect the user and how much of it is to protect Facebook from lawsuits, right? Like, where's that balance there?
I mean, fundamentally, what we have to do to comply with global regulations and protect the company is honor the user's privacy in our products.
Sure.
Like, that's the fundamental action. Like, we're doing our best to ensure we have a robust system to understand the privacy risks to users and mitigate them. So the two come together. We can't protect the company without also doing the work to protect our users.
Sure. Now, Facebook is also, I said it again, Meta is going through its year of efficiency right now. How does that affect you? Like, you know, there's been layoffs in the company and everything else. Has that affected you in any way?
Our focus on efficiency is predominantly, it sort of fits with the evolution of our privacy work. It's predominantly about automating our oversight processes as much as possible, which is sort of part and parcel with where we are evolution-wise. And, you know, as much as I talk about our infrastructure work, so a key aspect of efficiency is a project we call internally privacy-aware infrastructure, which is essentially about putting more automated purpose limitation requirements on a piece of data that require less manual intervention from engineers to ensure that it doesn't travel beyond the data stores it should. We're also very focused on automating a bunch of different compliance processes in standardizing mitigations and privacy review. So our year of efficiency focus is mostly about adding that automation to make our work more effective and to reduce the sort of hours required across the company to do it.
Sure, because it sounds like a lot of what you're doing right now is very manual.
It's a mix. We have a lot of automation and a lot of tooling, but yeah, some of these privacy reviews are manual. You need actual humans to assess what the risk would be and how to mitigate it. And we always will need that.
Sure.
But ultimately the desire is to automate as much as possible.
And you've talked about the culture change quite a bit, but yeah, the core Facebook Meta is still an advertising company, and there must be some friction between the groups that care about advertising, privacy, and monetization, and what you're doing, right? Do you feel that friction in your job?
Yeah, I mean, Meta's a company that believes deeply in the value of personalization. Personalization in user experiences, so we're surfacing the most relevant content, and personalization in the value of your interactions with businesses, so that you're seeing relevant ads, and so that is definitely a core belief and a core strategy of the company. And there is, as we seek to assess and mitigate privacy risks, there is a little bit of natural tension in sort of navigating a business objective and ensuring that privacy risks are sufficiently mitigated. But I'd call that tension is pretty natural. Okay. It's more a feature than a bug of how we operate. And while there could be disagreements with any given product group at any time on what mitigation is required, I don't think there's no disagreement at the company on the importance of making sure we get privacy right in everything we do, sure. And that being existential to the company's existence and a core part of our promise to users.
Do you have an example for where that played out recently, that kind of friction between
I mean, the types of friction that we see in privacy review process, like a typical venue of example is we will discuss really deeply what's a sufficient degree of transparency to a consumer about a new data practice. We're launching any new practice. How we'll typically have options of multiple different design treatments on the text on a transparency screen. And we'll be trading off the degree of specificity to the user with the user experience of minimizing the number of clicks before you get to the experience. So that's like a pretty typical push-pull muscle that we'll litigate internally to try and arrive at the right solution.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of products in the market at this point, right? You've kind of consolidated most of the privacy practices between them at this point, I think, right? So, but you've just launched Threads, that's your newest product. That was an opportunity, I thought, to start over from scratch, but that's not quite what you did. I mean, you went with the kind of the Instagram privacy regulate. Why not just start over?
Well, I wouldn't. I think every product we launch is essentially starting over on privacy, right? It gets its own independent privacy risk assessment, and so that's part and parcel of what we do. With Threads specifically, we prioritize privacy considerations from the outset, ranging from did users understand our data practices? What were our data practices going to be? And as you reference, one of the core decisions we made with Threads was to tie it to the Instagram graph from the outset. So an example of what that meant for a key privacy consideration is if you're going to tie it to the Instagram graph, how do you honor a user deletion request on Threads, right? And that was one of the more discussed features as part of the privacy review process for Threads, because technically, out of the gate, it was extremely challenging to allow deletion of a separate Threads account without also deleting your overall Instagram account. So we paid particular attention to ensuring the user could still exercise their deletion rights by deactivating the account to sort of hide all content, setting it to private, or deleting individual threads. And then because this process is sort of living and we're constantly evaluating privacy, we've continued to update things, and we will launch actual deletion of a Threads account, by December of this year.
Okay, so
it's why it's important that these things are living. Like, we're constantly assessing the risks and updating our practices, right? Just use Threads as an example. The other thing coming down the pike is, we intend to integrate Threads more deeply with the Fediverse and be a good citizen there and enable that. And the Fediverse brings up a series of fascinating privacy challenges, obviously.
Because the data is everywhere.
Yeah, let's just stick with deletion, right? You start a thread on Threads, it travels to third-party servers, you decide you want to delete that, you have the right to delete it. What are the technical mechanisms by which you can honor that deletion request when it's left our services? Is it even possible? What are the business arrangements with other third parties? This is the type of next Threads privacy challenge that we're grappling with internally now, and we don't have the answers yet.
Yeah, it's interesting because that Mastodon server could it could just be some private person that you have no relationship with and no control over.
So how do you reset those user expectations, or how do you find ways to honor that deletion request? Really tricky. Yep.
Could those tricky questions halt you from actually joining the Fediverse with Threads in the end? Could that be a blocker?
Joining the Fediverse for Threads is certainly a key value proposition that's always been at the heart of Threads. So our approach right now is to find ways to solve those challenges.
All right. Yeah. Good luck with that. That sounds daunting just by itself. We just have a few minutes left here, but if you were a startup, right? You mentioned it, for a small company to comply with all of this is very hard. Like, if there's a lot of startups out here, what would you tell them? How should they even approach this? Yeah.
I've never I don't know what advice I have for small companies, because my reality is so inherently big company, given the scale of our data use and the scale of our resources. I think as a small company, off the top of my head, the most important thing is to try and track and standardize solutions across a whole array of global requirements. And obviously, there's a lot of third-party vendors out there who could probably help with some of this. I'm not super familiar with that landscape.
Fair.
We do most of our things in-house, but I think it's sort of probably a critical ongoing consideration and unfortunately expense for these players.
For sure.
Yep.
Well, let me give you another last question then. What do you yourself do to ensure your privacy online?
What do? I pay real attention to my individual settings and controls in every app that I use. Obviously, I guess it comes with the territory. I'm a more educated consumer of how everyone sets up their settings.
Sure.
And that's probably the primary thing I do. I don't necessarily comb through every online player's privacy policy in extreme detail.
Few people do.
Yeah, but I definitely will peruse and poke at every setting that's available on every major player.
All right, awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.